some of the questions were already answered, I think, in the chat. And so one question is from Simbori and Kambu, is a question for Chiara and the methodological team, so for Torsten and Pierre Coté. Can we have one comment of the challenges for control groups in randomized control trial and ethics considerations? Who wants to reply? Torsten?
I can have one comment on the control group. Pierre talked about the difficult.
Torsten, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Pierre talked about the problem of building up a placebo control group. And there's another big issue that is usual care. Because if you compare rehabilitation interventions to usual care, it's very important to know what usual care is, especially if we talk about an international context. Even we have done studies in Germany with regard to usual care, and you could see that there's a vast variation of this typical care, even within one country. So what does that mean if you are, for example, ahead of usual care when you don't really know what usual care is? So there's a real issue in describing what usual care is in order to make the results of comparison with usual care meaningful. So that was one issue that was that we ran across. Or maybe Pierre wants add another thing.
Yeah, thank you, Thorsten. I think the ethical question is also extremely important, obviously. And, you know, the selection of a control group when a known treatment is, or a treatment is known to have some level of effectiveness, should be used in this context to test a new intervention. In other words, you cannot withhold treatments and effective interventions for people who require care. So we are in a situation often where we have to select what the best standard approach to care is, because these patients need to be treated. So it's a very different than a drug trial, the context of a drug trial or other interventions where you can truly have a placebo or you don't know what intervention is most effective. So I'll pass it on to other members of the committee to answer. It's a very important question.
If I may add to this, is somehow curious, just to say something, that an ethical committee would not allow us to perform a study without providing treatment to the control group. And then since we still have to provide something, then we are in the situation in which we cannot really perform a well-done, unbiased study, because we always have to compare to something that is provided and that is different all over the world. So there is an objective reason for how we are obliged sometimes to perform research, and we cannot do it differently. And but we are in a situation in which then the evidence we produce is downgraded because of how we must do, because an ethical committee wouldn't allow us to do differently. So that is some of the big issues that we have to face. But also, as Cochrane Rehab, we think that we don't have to hide behind the difficulties. So what I mean is that we have to provide ourselves the answers and the correct answers. And this is why we are born, in fact, to try to find the solutions that are for our field, that are proper to our field, and then fight for these solutions if they are meaningful. So not just to say, okay, it's not possible, and then what else? No, it's not possible, then what we do? That should be approaching my way of thinking.
Thank you all. read some of our comments, and then Carlotta, when you want to join the discussion, there was a comment from Judith on our work with the WHO on developmental guidelines, but she already find our project Before Rehab on the website. I don't know if you want to add something on this or comment on our work with the WHO.
Yes, I think most of you may be aware that the WHO launched a project in 2017, which is called Rehabilitation 2030, a call for action, in order to upscale and strengthen rehabilitation in the health systems worldwide. In that context, there were several projects, and one of them is the development of a package of rehabilitation interventions for 20 health conditions that then can be available as a sort of minimum standard of interventions for those health conditions in rehabilitation to be handed over to ministers of health who want to organize rehabilitation in their countries. In that project, we very closely collaborated in two ways. One was we collaborated on the methodology of the project to set up the different steps to arrive at this package of evidence-based interventions. And on the other hand, we also extracted all the evidence from the Cochrane Library on rehabilitation interventions for those health conditions to be included in those packages. We have some papers on then, if you want, we can discuss also later, but that was in a nutshell a very nice example, in fact, of how we try to collaborate on a project that is really made to strengthen rehabilitation and also to impact, hopefully, on health policies. And that will be a topic we will discuss in the workshop 3 also next Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlotte. I don't know if Stefan or someone else wants to comment to a comment from Maria Valeria Di Martino. Maria Valeria Di Martino is from Napoli, so I know her personally. She's a speech therapist, but she's very much involved with policy decision maker at the regional level in Campania. And she commented on how the new rehabilitation definition might be important for professionals, for policy making and financing, and helping financing rehabilitation services. What do you think? Could this be?
It's obvious. Okay, we didn't develop our definition for that reason. Our definition was developed for research. And we had to be very strict in following some methodology, but obviously that will also shape our way of thinking. As usually, when you provided, just let's think of ICF. Before ICF, when we spoke of functioning, we didn't really know what we were speaking about. In fact, we were not even, someone was speaking of function, someone of functioning, someone of functional. It was quite confused. And the definition is like a common language. Then nowadays, when we speak of capacity, we speak of performance, we speak of impairments, we speak of disability, we know what we're speaking about. And that drives our way of thinking, not only our research. And this is something that will probably also happen with rehabilitation. So we are, when we started the process, it was a little bit confused also at high levels about rehabilitation interventions versus interventions for rehabilitation. Rehabilitation as a set of interventions or rehabilitation as a process. They are quite different things, you know, because a set of intervention, you just put the things one after the other, while a process, you mix the things. And I used to say, you are producing a cake. The interventions are the ingredients, But then if you are a good cook, you have a good process. If you are a bad cook, you have an awful cake. And that is how it works. So the different interventions put together in the right way, you also need a good cook. And this is also one of the challenges of rehabilitation and one of the problems of rehabilitation. So here we are trying to combine clinical understanding with, as Torsten said at one point, we had philosophers, we had methodologists, we had researchers, we had clinicians, and we tried to put all of them together. And we have all the different professionals involved as well. And it was really very, very interesting to have all the answers from the survey, from the different experts from all over the world, and try to figure out a way to combine all the different perspectives in one view. Then how that will impact on health managers. That's interesting. I don't know if the impact will always be what we want. And that was not really meant to be economically wise. It was meant to be about what we do. And obviously that will have an impact economically. But sometimes, okay, there is one point there. Not all what rehabilitation professionals do is rehabilitation. That must be acknowledged, and that will have an economic impact. If you are doing a single intervention, we define that is not rehabilitation. That is an intervention. So like any other professional, you are producing an intervention. Then there are multiple interventions put together. How do you pay for those multiple interventions in the rehabilitation process? For example, in Italy, we used to pay for single interventions, not for the whole process. And that has a huge economic impact. I don't think it's only in Italy, it's in many other countries. So perhaps also our health managers will start thinking of rehabilitation as something different than just single interventions, 1 + 1 + 1, not always does 3. It can give 5 for some good cooks, and for bad cooks gives 1 out of 3. So it will have an impact. I truly believe that, but which one, I don't know. Sorry if I went long, but we have some time.
I'd say also that it will increase research, and so it will increase evidence in rehabilitation, and so we can then put this evidence into practice. So for sure, it will have an impact in the very end.
Can I comment something?
Sure.
Thank you very much for this interesting afternoon. It's a very, very good way to celebrate. Just 2 remarks. One, the challenge is that especially in rehabilitation, we need the individualized rehabilitation program. This is very important aspect, because the individualization sometimes seems to be against the overall evidence, but is very important. Another, but of course we don't have the time to discuss that. We ought to be stick to the evidence, because are very important evidence in order to apply the best treatment possible for the patient. But one topic, a very important topic, is the topic of outcome, and especially the perspective of use the PROM, the patient-related outcome. So just a general question about this perspective that should be very important in general, but specifically for the rehabilitation.